The vet had performed this procedure countless times, but never had he seen a puppy react like this. With tears streaming down his face, the tiny dog pressed his paw against the vet's hand, as if begging for one last chance. What happened next left everyone in the room speechless. The waiting room of the veterinary clinic hummed with its usual rhythm. Phones ringing, pets whining, and the faint smell of disinfectant in the air. But when the shelter worker walked in carrying a small, frail bundle wrapped in a worn towel, the energy shifted. All eyes turned. Inside the bundle was a trembling puppy. His fur was matted with dirt, his ribs visible beneath his thin frame, and his wide eyes seemed far too knowing for his age. He didn't bark, didn't whimper. He just stared, silently, as though he understood exactly where he was. The receptionist glanced at the paperwork and her face softened. "Scheduled for euthanasia," she murmured. A sigh passed through the staff. Cases like this weren't new, but this one felt different. The shelter worker set the puppy gently on the cold metal table. His tiny body shivered. The vet entered, expecting routine procedure. But the moment their eyes met, something inside him tightened. This wasn't going to be routine at all. Dr. Harris had been a veterinarian for nearly 20 years. He had seen every kind of case: broken bones, sickness, and sadly, countless animals whose time had run out. But when he approached the trembling puppy on the table, he froze. Those eyes, they weren't the glazed, weary eyes he often saw in abandoned pets. These eyes were alive, filled with something raw and desperate. The puppy didn't cower or turn away. Instead, he lifted his head ever so slightly, locking his gaze on the vet as if pleading. Dr. Harris reached out gently, brushing his fingers over the puppy's scruffy fur. The tiny creature didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a soft, almost human sigh, as though relieved to finally be touched with kindness. Something stirred inside the vet's chest, a heaviness he hadn't felt in years. He glanced at the shelter worker. "Are we certain about this?" he asked quietly. The worker only shrugged. "He's listed as unfit for adoption." But Dr. Harris wasn't convinced. Not anymore. Dr. Harris prepared himself, though his hands felt heavier than usual. He gathered the syringe and the necessary tools, but something in his chest tightened with every step closer to the small, fragile body on the table. The puppy's gaze never left him. Those wide, glistening eyes followed his every move. Then, just as Dr. Harris reached out, the little dog did something that froze the entire room. With a shaky effort, the puppy lifted one paw and pressed it firmly against the vet's hand. It wasn't just a touch, it was a plea. Gasps rippled through the staff standing nearby. The shelter worker covered her mouth, whispering, "Oh my God." Dr. Harris felt his throat close. He looked down at the trembling paw resting in his palm and saw tears welling in the puppy's eyes. Actual tears sliding down his tiny face. For the first time in years, the seasoned vet felt his own eyes sting. The syringe trembled in his grip. This wasn't just an animal before him. It was a soul begging for one more chance. That Dr. Harris froze, his hand trembling beneath the weight of that tiny paw. He had performed this procedure hundreds of times, always reminding himself it was mercy. But this felt different. This puppy wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He stepped back, pulling off his gloves with a frustrated sigh. The room was silent, everyone waiting for him to finish what he'd started. But instead of moving forward, he turned away, pressing his hand against his forehead. Images from his past flickered through his mind. Rescued animals who'd gone on to live long, happy lives. Families who had once thanked him for giving their pets a second chance. And then, darker memories. The ones he'd chosen not to question. Animals whose eyes had pleaded just like this that he couldn't do it. "Not this time." The shelter worker frowned. "Doctor, what are you doing?" Dr. Harris turned, voice firm, but shaking with emotion. "I can't put him down. Not until I know why he's fighting this hard." The syringe lay untouched on the counter. For the first time in years, Dr. Harris had broken his own rule. Determined, Dr. Harris placed the puppy gently back in his kennel instead of preparing the injection. "Run every test we've got," he ordered his staff. Confused but obedient. They moved quickly: blood work, scans, and a full physical exam. Hours passed, the puppy watching silently from behind the bars. Whenever Harris passed by, those tired eyes followed him, filled with a hope that tugged at the vet's heart. The results trickled in one by one. Harris hunched over the files, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. Finally, he leaned back, stunned. "He's not terminal," he whispered. "He's not even sick." The staff gathered around, equally shocked. Malnourished, dehydrated, and badly neglected, yes. But beyond that, perfectly healthy. Someone had given up on this pup. Too soon, assuming weakness meant hopelessness. In reality, all he needed was food, care, and love. The doctor. Harris walked back to the kennel. The puppy perked up, pressing his paw against the bars as if asking, "Well?" The vet crouched down, tears blurring his vision. "You were never dying, were you?" he whispered. "You were just waiting for someone to see you." The next day, Dr. Harris began asking questions. He called the shelter worker back, demanding details. At first, she shrugged, picked him up on the edge of town, looked half dead. No one claimed him. We figured he was too weak to make it. But Harris pressed further, checking records, talking to locals. Slowly, the puppy's story emerged. He had once belonged to a family that moved away suddenly, leaving him behind. Neighbors had seen him waiting on the porch for days, then scavenging scraps, searching alleys, and curling up in cardboard boxes to survive the cold nights. The pup had been abandoned, not because he was sick, but because no one wanted the burden to as Harris pieced it together. He felt his chest tighten. That's why the little dog had fought so hard, because he had already beaten the odds. Survival wasn't just instinct for him. It was his entire story. Looking into those golden eyes again, Harris murmured, "You weren't begging for life. You were begging for someone to finally believe in you." Dr. Harris refused to let the puppy's story end in tragedy. He called the shelter director personally, his voice firm. "He's not to be euthanized. Not now. Not ever." At first, there was hesitation. Space was limited, resources stretched thin. But Harris's conviction left no room for argument. "If no one will take him," he said quietly, "then I will." Word spread quickly through the clinic and beyond. Soon, a local family who had recently lost their elderly dog heard the story. They visited the clinic, and when the puppy stumbled out of his kennel on wobbly legs, tail wagging shyly, their hearts melted instantly. Within days, adoption papers were signed. The puppy went home to a warm bed, gentle hands, and laughter that filled the air. With proper meals and love, his body grew stronger, his coat shinier, his eyes brighter. And every time he lifted his paw to rest it in someone's hand, it wasn't a plea anymore. It was a thank you. Weeks later, Dr. Harris stopped by the family's home. The once frail puppy now bounded across the yard, ears flopping, tail wagging like a banner of joy. He leapt into the vet's arms, covering his face with wet kisses. Harris laughed, tears stinging his eyes. The memory of that tiny paw pressing against his hand replayed in his mind. It had been more than a plea for life. It was a reminder that hope can survive even in the darkest places. Standing with the family, Harris whispered, "He didn't just save his own life. He reminded me why I chose this profession." Sometimes, the most powerful lessons don't come from textbooks or years of practice. They come from a single moment, a single touch, and a small creature begging not to be forgotten.